Have you ever watched the person you loved most become a stranger? What happens when the dream of forever turns into a nightmare? Sarah and Ethan were once the perfect couple until one decision shattered everything. Their marriage was supposed to last, but now, as they fight over their son and everything they once built, neither of them knows how to fix the wreckage they've left behind. This is a story of love lost, betrayal, and the heartbreaking truth behind a marriage that ended before they ever had a chance to say goodbye. Sarah and Ethan's marriage had always seemed like the kind you read about in fairy tales, passionate, supportive, and perfectly balanced. Or, at least, that's how it looked to everyone else. Behind closed doors, their dynamic was shifting, slowly but noticeably, like tectonic plates preparing for an earthquake. Ethan was a dreamer. His novels had once landed on bestseller lists, earning him a reputation as a masterful storyteller. But lately, the stories weren't coming. He spent more time staring at a blank screen than writing, and the steady paycheck from ghostwriting uninspired romance novels didn't feel like success. It felt like surrender. Sarah was his opposite. Pragmatic, determined, and fiercely ambitious, she had climbed the ladder at her architecture firm with single-minded focus. She designed high-rises that dominated city skylines, earning awards and respect. But her relentless drive came with a cost: late nights, missed family dinners, and an emotional distance Ethan couldn't ignore. Their son, Lucas, a bright and curious 8-year-old, seemed to be the glue holding them together. Ethan adored Lucas's imagination and spent hours building forts and writing stories with him. Sarah loved him fiercely but found herself missing his childhood moments, often glued to her phone, even when she was home. Ethan had started to feel like a single parent, even though they lived under the same roof. The cracks turned into fault lines one Tuesday night. Lucas had his school play, a small role as a tree, but he was ecstatic. Ethan made sure Lucas's costume was perfect, every leaf and branch in place. He saved a front row seat and held a bouquet of daisies, Lucas's favorite. But as the curtains rose, Sarah's seat next to him remained empty. Ethan glanced at his phone. No text, no explanation. He sighed, plastering on a smile for Lucas as the play began. When Sarah finally came home that night, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors, Ethan was waiting for her in the living room. His arms were crossed, the daisies now wilted and discarded on the coffee table. She froze, seeing his expression, a mix of hurt, frustration, and something heavier, something that scared her. "I had to stay late," she said, her voice clipped but defensive. "It was important." "Important for who?" "Because it wasn't for Lucas, and it sure as hell wasn't for us," Ethan replied. His tone wasn't angry, just cold, distant. Sarah's heart sank, but she masked it with defiance. "I'm doing this for our family, Ethan. You think I want to miss these things? Someone has to keep things afloat." "Afloat?" Ethan snapped, his voice rising for the first time. "You don't even see it, do you? You're not keeping us afloat. You're steering this ship right into the rocks." The words hit Sarah like a slap. She wanted to argue, to yell, to cry, but instead, she turned and walked to the bedroom. She stared at the closet, her hand lingering on the suitcase tucked in the corner. She wasn't ready to leave, not yet. But in that moment, the thought crossed her mind for the first time. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe the rocks were closer than she'd ever admitted. The days after that Tuesday night felt like walking on broken glass. Sarah and Ethan avoided each other, their conversations reduced to clipped exchanges about groceries or Lucas's soccer schedule. But silence was a fragile truce, and it didn't last. Ethan had always been the one to smooth things over, to apologize first, even when he didn't believe he was wrong. This time he didn't. He couldn't. The weight of Sarah's absence at the play lingered like an open wound. Sarah, on the other hand, buried herself in work. She convinced herself that the problem wasn't her priorities, it was Ethan's lack of understanding. Then came the breaking point. Lucas's birthday was around the corner, and Ethan had spent weeks planning a backyard party, complete with a treasure hunt and homemade cake. But 2 days before the party, Sarah announced she'd accepted an invitation to a networking event in another city. "I'll be back in time for the party," she said casually, scrolling through her phone. Will you? Ethan shot back, his voice laced with sarcasm. Sarah looked up, irritated. What's that supposed to mean? It means you missed his play, you miss family dinners, and now you're planning to miss his birthday prep. Forgive me if I don't believe you're prioritizing your family. Her jaw tightened. I'm doing this for him, for us. If I don't show up, I lose the account, and then where will we be? Living off your great American novel that hasn't happened yet. Ethan flinched, the words cutting deep. He wanted to shout, to defend himself, but instead, he laughed bitterly. You know what, Sarah?
Go.
Go to your event. I'll handle everything, like I always do. When Sarah returned the night before the party, the house was spotless, the decorations were up, and Lucas was in bed, happily dreaming of his treasure hunt. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, frosting a lopsided pirate ship cake. She hesitated in the doorway, her stomach twisting with guilt. But instead of apologizing, she said, "The event went well. They loved my pitch." Ethan didn't look up. Good for you. The party was a success, but it was clear something had shifted. Even Lucas noticed. Why are you and Mom so mad at each other? He asked Ethan later that night. Ethan had no answer, just a lump in his throat that wouldn't go away. It didn't take long for the tension to reach its breaking point. Sarah came home late one evening to find Ethan sitting in the dark, a stack of papers in front of him. Divorce papers. What's this? She asked, her voice trembling. It's what you wanted, isn't it? Ethan said, his voice hollow. You checked out of this marriage months ago, Sarah. I'm just making it official. Sarah stared at the papers, her hands shaking. She wanted to argue, to tear them up and throw them in his face, but part of her knew he was right. She'd been running from their problems, convincing herself that success at work would fix everything. Now it was too late. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and tense discussions. What had once been a partnership was now a battlefield, with lawyers as their generals. Sarah insisted on primary custody of Lucas, arguing that Ethan's unstable career couldn't provide the structure their son needed. Ethan fired back, painting Sarah as an absent mother who prioritized work over her family. The courtroom became their new battleground, and Lucas became the unwitting pawn. Ethan hated the idea of dragging their son into the mess, but Sarah's lawyer made it clear. To win, they had to fight dirty. Ethan's lawyer wasn't much better, digging up every instance where Sarah had missed a school event or canceled family plans. The love they'd once shared was now unrecognizable, buried under layers of bitterness and betrayal. Each hearing felt like another nail in the coffin of their family. Ethan's resentment grew with every accusation, and Sarah's guilt turned into anger. But the worst part was Lucas. The once happy boy now avoided questions about his parents, retreating into himself. One night, Ethan found him in his room, staring at a picture of their family from a vacation years ago. Why can't you and Mom just fix it? Lucas asked, his voice breaking. Ethan had no answer. For the first time, he realized that no one would truly win this battle. Not him, not Sarah, and certainly not Lucas. The courtroom war raged on, but the toll it took on Ethan and Sarah was immeasurable. Each new piece of evidence, every stinging accusation, left deeper scars. Ethan thought he was prepared for anything until Sarah dropped a bombshell that shook him to his core. I've been offered a promotion, she said one afternoon during a tense meeting with their lawyers. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed a mix of guilt and resolve. It's in Seattle. If I take it, Lucas and I will have to move. Ethan's jaw tightened, his fists clenching under the table. You're planning to take my son across the country? Are you serious, Sarah? It's not just for me, she snapped. It's for him. Better schools, a safer neighborhood, more opportunities. You don't get to make that decision alone, Ethan fired back. You've already taken enough from me. You're not taking Lucas too? The lawyers immediately jumped in, arguing over custody arrangements and relocation rights. But Ethan could barely hear them. His mind was racing, his heart pounding. Sarah was trying to erase him from Lucas's life, and he couldn't let it happen. Fueled by desperation, Ethan decided to fight harder. He began documenting everything, every missed school event, every late pickup, every time Lucas asked where his mom was. His lawyer encouraged him, but deep down, Ethan hated what he was becoming. Then came the twist Ethan never saw coming. During one of the hearings, Sarah's lawyer presented evidence that left Ethan speechless, a series of private emails between Ethan and his editor. "Mr. Parker," Sarah's lawyer began, his voice dripping with smugness, "would you care to explain these emails suggesting you declined several lucrative book deals to focus on, what did you call it? Creative freedom?" Ethan's face flushed as the courtroom erupted in whispers. He had turned down those deals because they didn't align with his artistic vision, but now, Sarah's lawyer was spinning it as proof that Ethan was financially reckless and incapable of providing stability for Lucas. Sarah looked at him with a mixture of triumph and sadness. She hadn't wanted to go this far, but the stakes were too high. "You did this?" Ethan whispered to her during a break. "I had no choice," she said, avoiding his gaze. "You wouldn't back down." But the biggest shock was yet to come. That evening, after another exhausting day in court, Ethan received a call from Lucas's school. Lucas had been caught fighting with another student, a behavior completely out of character for him. When Ethan arrived at the school, he found Sarah already there, sitting outside the principal's office. She looked shaken, her usual composure replaced by raw vulnerability. "What happened?" Ethan asked, his voice laced with concern. "Lucas said the other kid called us divorce losers," Sarah said quietly, her eyes glistening with tears. "He hit him." For the first time in months, Ethan and Sarah sat side by side, united by their shared worry for their son. As the principal explained the situation, Ethan stole a glance at Sarah. She looked exhausted, defeated. And for the first time, he saw not his enemy, but the woman he'd fallen in love with, the woman he was losing piece by piece. But the moment of unity was short-lived. That night, Ethan received an unexpected visitor, his lawyer. She handed him a folder with a grave expression. "Ethan, there's something you need to see," she said. Inside the folder were surveillance photos. They showed Sarah at a cafe, sitting with a man Ethan didn't recognize. They were laughing, leaning close, and in one photo, the man touched her hand. "She's seeing someone," the lawyer said. "This could change everything." Ethan stared at the photos, his mind racing. Was this why Sarah had been so distant? Was this the real reason she wanted to move to Seattle? The next day in court, Ethan confronted Sarah during a recess. "Who is he?" he demanded, holding up the photos. Sarah's face paled. "It's not what you think," she said quickly. "He's a colleague." "A colleague?" Ethan interrupted. "You're tearing our family apart, and you're sitting in cafes with him?" Sarah's lawyer intervened, pulling her aside, but the damage was done. Ethan's world, already crumbling, now felt completely shattered. For the first time, he wondered if he had been wrong to fight so hard. Was this battle destroying Lucas more than it was saving him? And was there anything left between him and Sarah worth salvaging? Ethan couldn't sleep that night. The photos of Sarah with another man burned in his mind, but something else gnawed at him even more: Lucas. His son was hurting, and Ethan felt powerless to protect him. For all his fighting, for all his accusations and counterarguments, the one person he wanted to save the most was slipping further away. The next court date came faster than Ethan expected. He walked into the courtroom with his lawyer's words echoing in his ears. "We can use this, Ethan. This could be the leverage we need to win." But when he saw Sarah sitting across the room, staring blankly at the table, something in him shifted. She looked fragile, like a shadow of the woman he once knew. The hearing began, and the tension was unbearable. Sarah's lawyer painted Ethan as a reckless dreamer, someone too unstable to provide a secure home for Lucas. Ethan's lawyer countered, using the surveillance photos as ammunition. "Your Honor," Ethan's lawyer began, "these photos clearly show that Ms. Harper has been engaging in a personal relationship during this critical period of the custody battle. This raises serious questions about her priorities and judgment." Sarah stood abruptly. "It's not a relationship," she said, her voice breaking. "He's a friend who listened when I felt like I was drowning." The courtroom fell silent. For the first time, Ethan saw the raw truth in her eyes, not defiance, not anger, but pain. Your Honor, Sarah continued, her voice trembling, this custody battle is destroying all of us. Ethan and we've made mistakes, but the person who's suffering the most is Lucas. He's just a little boy, and we're tearing him apart because we're too hurt, too angry, to see what we're doing to him. Her words hit Ethan like a wave. He glanced at Lucas, sitting in the back of the room with a court-appointed guardian. His son's eyes were wide, filled with confusion and sadness. Ethan's throat tightened as a memory surfaced. Lucas, as a toddler, climbing into his lap with a picture book, asking, "Daddy, can you read this to me?" That little boy trusted him, looked up to him, and now, Ethan wondered if he'd betrayed that trust. The judge called for a recess, and Ethan followed Sarah into the hallway. She was leaning against the wall, her shoulders slumped. "Sarah," he said softly, and she turned to face him. "Why did it have to come to this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why couldn't we just fix it?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, his own voice breaking. "Maybe we were too proud, too scared. But you're right. Lucas deserves better than this." For the first time in months, they spoke without lawyers or accusations. They talked about Lucas, his favorite stories, his dreams of becoming an astronaut, the way he used to beg for pancakes every Saturday morning. For a brief moment, it felt like they were a team again, united by their love for their son. But as the recess ended, reality set back in. The judge announced a decision: joint custody, with Sarah retaining primary residence due to her stable career. Ethan's heart sank, but he nodded. He had to believe it was the right choice for Lucas. The courtroom emptied, but Ethan lingered, watching as Sarah gathered her things. As she turned to leave, she hesitated. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft but steady, "for what it's worth, I never stopped believing in you. I just wish we hadn't lost each other along the way." He nodded, unable to speak, as she walked out the door. That evening, Ethan sat in Lucas's room, surrounded by toys and books. Lucas was asleep, clutching the stuffed astronaut Ethan had given him on his 5th birthday. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel anger or resentment, just a deep, aching sadness. He opened his laptop, staring at the blank screen for a long time before finally typing the first line. Once upon a time, there was a family who lost their way but never stopped searching for home. What would you do if you were in Ethan or Sarah's shoes? Do you believe love can survive even the deepest wounds? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. There's always more to the story, and we can't wait to share it with you.